into an IRA backed by physical gold and silver, which is perfect for people who might want to protect their hard-earned retirement savings from future geopolitical uncertainty. When you look back historically, you see that when the bottom falls out of everything else, gold does tend to safeguard savings. It has never been worth zero. Birch Gold Group has thousands of satisfied customers, countless 5-star reviews, and A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. Contact Birch Gold Group right now. Get a free information kit on physical precious metals. See if diversifying at least a little bit into gold and silver makes sense for you. The comprehensive 16-page kit reveals how gold and silver can protect your savings, how you can legally move that IRA or 401k out of risky stocks and bonds into a precious metals IRA if that is something you choose to do. To get your no-cost, no-obligation kit, text BEN to 474747. Again, text BEN, my name, to 474747. Okay, so yesterday, I was minding my own business, covering the news as we do here every day on the Ben Shapiro Show, and suddenly across my feed comes this piece from a woman named Talia Levin. She's a writer and researcher based in Brooklyn. She used to work for Media Matters. She also used to work for The New Yorker until she was unceremoniously fired. Why was she fired? Well, she fired from The New Yorker. She was fired or resigned from The New Yorker after she suggested that a retired Marine was actually a Nazi. You have to go all the way back to, well, actually, it's not that long ago, June 2018, when this happened, according to the Tampa Bay Times. Talia Levin, whose tweet about a Pasco veteran's tattoo implied that he was a Nazi, has apologized to him and resigned from her position as a fact-checker at the New Yorker magazine. But in another tweet, Levin also lashed out at the Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, saying it unfairly targeted her in its own tweet about combat wounded veteran Justin Gertner. This has been a wild and difficult week, Levin said in a tweet. I owe ICE agent Justin Gertner a sincere apology for spreading a rumor about his tattoo. However, I do not think it is acceptable for a federal agency to target a private citizen for a good faith, hastily rectified error. Well, you weren't a private citizen when you said this. You were a reporter when you suggested that the guy was actually a Nazi. Levin tweeted about a cross-shaped tattoo on Gertner's elbow. Of course, that was just a cross. It was a symbol of his own Marine battalion, apparently. He was wounded, I guess, in both legs. Levin tweeted, I had become a weapon used to discredit my colleagues and the vital work they do, holding power to account. As a result, I've resigned after 3 years at the New Yorker. And then she suggested that ICE misled people about her. She said, ICE lied about me, saying I originated the scrutiny of Gertner's tattoo. She says, I wasn't the genesis of this rumor. There are still tweets up with tens of thousands of likes explicitly calling the tattoo Nazi. My own tweet was responsive to extant scrutiny. I deleted it. I issued a correction within 15 minutes, long before ICE could have been aware of it. I was targeted because I was part of a news organization critical of ICE. And then she said she was a useful foil, a fat Jewish feminist with a Harvard education. ICE said I baselessly slandered an American hero, artificially pitting me against a disabled veteran, and engineered a conservative news cycle in which I was a villain. So she is, a person who is fond of leveling charges against others and then playing victim. So naturally, she ended up working at Media Matters for a short while before, I guess, she moved on to writing freelance. Well, today she has a piece in the Washington Post titled How the Far Right Spread Politically Convenient Lies About the Notre Dame Fire. She says, as the conflagration spread through the ancient timbers of Notre Dame's cathedral attic on Monday, a parallel fire was spreading on social media. This one was willfully set. A series of conspiracy theories neatly slotted into pre-existing cultural biases. And soon enough, willing believers were aflame with hate. The conspiracy theorizing began almost as soon as the blaze did, right when people saw the shocking, transfixing video of the cathedral's spire toppling. While French authorities began to assert almost immediately that the fire was apparently accidental, the brief gap between the startling image's generation and their explication was enough for far-right figures to exploit with their own sinister insinuations. Their prevailing view was nearly identical and apparently completely false, that the fire was deliberate and was probably set by Muslims. And then she quotes several people who suggest that the fire might not have happened accidentally. And there are certain people who suggested that perhaps this was Muslims. And then she says this, many figures on the right took the opportunity to turn Notre Dame into a metonym for Western civilization as a whole, intimating that far more than a cathedral was in peril. Just as the fire hit social media, conspiracy theorist and brain supplement salesman Mike Cernovich dramatically tweeted, the West has fallen. And here's where it gets good. Shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro, that's the only description that they take of me these days, radical conservative or far-right. The Economist calls me a radical conservative after falsely labeling me alt-right. And now, this dolt writing in the pages of the Washington Post suggests that I am a far-right pundit. But that's not all she suggests. She says, shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, that seems pretty unambiguous and pretty inoffensive, right? I mean, I said that it was a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Yesterday on the podcast, I did a 15-minute segment all about the history of Notre Dame, as well as its place within the Judeo-Christian river of history. But Talia Levin is very upset about this. She writes, shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Given the already raging rumors about potential Muslim involvement, these tweets evoked the specter of a war between Islam and the West that is also part of numerous far-right narratives. It was a central thread in the manifesto of the alleged Christchurch New Zealand shooter. She names him, I won't. On Tuesday, Shapiro called this article simply gross and said he called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization because it is, not because of malicious intent. She puts this back in parentheses. That is a late addition to the article. She then juxtaposes me with Richard Spencer, an actual white supremacist and white nationalist. She says, Richard Spencer, professional racist and coiner of the term alt-right, openly advocated for such warfare, stating and misspelling his hopes that the fire would spur the white man into action to seize power in his country, in Europe, in the world, and declaring such an insurgence a glorious purpose. And as BuzzFeed's Jane Litvinenko reported, other more oblique figures managed to go even further from provocation in the abstract to more concrete incitement. And then she talks about how Ilhan Omar has been slandered and how terrible it is. And then she ends with this. She says, by Tuesday morning, French authorities had declared the fire extinguished. The structure of Notre Dame is intact, although its spire, a 19th century edition, collapsed. But the conflagration of conspiracy, a corruption of the natural human tendency to assign meaning to events, rages through our information sphere unchecked. It should not take the imprecations of journalists to restrain this dangerous flow of misinformation. It is past time that those who stoke inflammatory rhetoric, knowing its potential to catalyze racist violence, were made to stop playing with fire before it's too late to control the inferno. So she finishes by calling for censorship. So, in other words, I say that Notre Dame is a Judeo-Christian symbol and a symbol of Western civilization. She suggests that I'm calling for war with Muslims based on that extraordinarily anodyne tweet. And then she suggests that I must be silenced because I am participating in a dangerous flow of misinformation. And then she blames me for violence. So hilariously enough, she says all of this. I tweet out how dumb this is because it is perfectly obvious what I meant in my original tweets. I talked about it repeatedly. Nowhere in my original tweet thread or anywhere else have I suggested that Muslims were behind the burning of Notre Dame because the evidence suggests that is not the case. That is not what the French government has said. Okay, all of this prompted Media Matters, the former employer for this not very nice person, Talia Levin, to tweet at me. Why? Well, because she had tweeted also that she thanked Media Matters for gathering information so she could write that column, which just demonstrates, by the way, where Media Matters lies in the sort of information complex for the mainstream media. Media Matters is a left-wing group founded by David Brock in coordination with John Podesta and Hillary Clinton right before Hillary Clinton ran for the Senate in 2000. It has long been a font for Clintonista hackery, and its main mission is basically to knock right-wing people off the air, to knock conservatives off the air. Media Matters has for years been funded by members of the Democratic Party left and higher echelon people on the left, specifically to dig up garbage on people on the right, and then to try to initiate fake secondary boycotts against advertisers. They did this to Tucker Carlson. They've done it to Laura Ingraham. They've done it to Rush Limbaugh. They've done it to Sean Hannity. They've done it to they're a 501c3 group. They certainly do not act like a 501c3 nonprofit. They're a horrible organization designed specifically to smear their own political opponents and the political opponents of people like Hillary Clinton, and then to target advertisers who dare to spend their money with those people. Even if those advertisers are not actually involved in promoting that show alone. So an advertiser can advertise on Tucker and also advertise on MSNBC. Media Matters targets the advertisers for Tucker. Media Matters, by the way, is so obviously partisan that after Joy Reid was hit with a bunch of allegations and, in fact, proof that she had said some terrible things in her past, Media Matters said that that was a hit job against Joy Reid. So Media Matters' only job is to create these long, giant files of supposedly terrible stuff that people on the right have said. So Talia Levin thanked Media Matters on her Twitter feed for helping her gather information for her crap column. And then I tweeted out that her crap column was, in fact, a crap column, and that she was taking a tweet that was perfectly innocent and historically accurate, and then trying to link me to violence against Muslims on the basis of that, which is not only a stretch, it is a tearing apart of any semblance of logic or reason or honesty. So I tweet that out, And Media Matters tweets back at me from their corporate account, F you and the Burro you wrote in on. So first of all, man, leave the Burro out of it. Like, I don't know what the Burro has to do with anything, but you leave that Burro out of it. And I don't understand, honestly, what the reference is supposed to be to. Okay, then Media Matters tweets this out, trying to justify, so they start getting ratioed, which means people on Twitter point out how dumb this is, and that Media Matters is a garbage organization, because they are. By the way, it is worthy of note. Media Matters is constantly quoted as a media watchdog. That's how it is termed constantly by the left-wing media, by the mainstream media. They are constantly calling Media Matters a media watchdogs, just as they called the Southern Poverty Law Center a racism watchdog. These are hardcore leftist groups with motivation. Media Matters proved it yesterday. F you and the Burro you wrote in on for criticizing an opinion columnist in the pages of the Washington Post for basically throwing out slanderous material. Not legally slanderous, but in the generic sense. We'll get to more of this in a second, because wait until you see what else Media Matters had to say. First, for decades, credit cards have been telling us to buy it now and pay for it later with interest. Despite your best intentions, that interest can indeed get out of control fast. With Lending Club, you can consolidate your debt or pay off credit cards with one fixed monthly payment. Since 2007, Lending Club has helped millions of people regain control of their finances with affordable, fixed-rate personal loans. No trips to a bank, no high-interest credit cards. Just go to lendingclub.com. Tell them about yourself, how much you want to borrow. Pick the terms that are right for you. If you're approved, your loan is automatically deposited into your bank account in as little as a few days. Lending Club is the #1 peer-to-peer lending platform with over $35 billion in loans issued. Go to lendingclub.com/Ben. Check your rate in minutes. Borrow up to $40,000. That is lendingclub.com/Ben. Lendingclub.com/Ben. All loans made by WebBank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. There is no reason for you to continue paying those enormous charge bills with the interest rates. Instead, consolidate your debt. That's what Lending Club is there to do. Check them out at lendingclub.com/Ben. You can check your rate in minutes, borrow up to $40,000. Lendingclub.com/Ben. Go check them out right now. Lendingclub.com/Ben. So, Media Matters didn't stop with suggesting that I F myself and also that they wanted to have sex with the donkey. They also continued by then trying to explain their way out of this. Right, so they tweeted out in the aftermath of this, they also tweeted, quote, some context. Talia Levin, a great writer who worked with us, has been on the receiving end of right-wing harassment for the better part of a year now, often spurred by spurious attacks on her work. So in other words, I am now inciting violence against her. So let's review the history. She attacked a disabled veteran and called him a Nazi and then deleted it. And when people got uptight, then it was incitement against her. She attacks me as someone who is supposedly calling for a war between Islam and the West, or a war on Muslims, or blaming Muslims based on Notre Dame Cathedral, a thing that I have not done. And then Media Matters responds by suggesting that my criticism of her crap column means that I am now generating harassment against her. Some context, a great writer who worked with us has been on the receiving end of right-wing harassment for the better part of a year now, often spurred by spurious attacks on her work. All of this, by the way, is a demonstration of the incitement lie that the left keeps telling over and over and over, which is that anybody on the right who says anything at all is involved in incitement. And it doesn't stop there, because Media Matters then continues. They keep trying to double down on this thing. The first rule of holes, of course, is to stop digging, but Media Matters never stops digging. So here's what Media Matters tweets then, quote, some additional relevant context here. This is hours later. This is the jerk store routine from Seinfeld. You know, they owned themselves, they played themselves, and now they're desperately trying to spin their way out of their own stupidity. So they say some additional relevant context here. Indeed, the specific MMFA tweet response Ben is drumming up outrage about is unbecoming of and unusual for an organization as prestigious as MMFA. By the way, so I guess now they're members of Prestige International from Step Brothers. That's exciting. When an organization calls itself prestigious, you know they're not. Then they say, but, you see, it was actually a reference to, drumroll, Ben's own tweet on related matter. And then they go and they dig up a tweet from a month ago in which I suggested that if you call me alt-right, you ought to F yourself and F the horse you rode in on, which was directed, I read it at the time on the air, at The Economist, because The Economist suggested in their headline that I was the alt-right sage without the rage, which was another lie. So Media Matters is now trying to dig up times where I have used the F word online and then try to claim that they are making a callback reference rather than just being partisan hacks, which is what they are. By the way, their incitement lie isn't just restricted to me. They have a piece today called National Review Writers Distortion Invites Harassment of an Abortion Clinic Director. A National Review writer, her name is Alexandra DeSanctis, she's terrific. So she pulled a tweet from Hales' Twitter thread to wrongly claim, according to Media Matters, that the clinic director did not believe that infants were legal persons until 30 days after birth. Supposedly, this is now incitement. So what exactly happened here? So Sanctis tweeted out, quote tweeted one of these tweets about a North Carolina bill. Hales' tweet highlighted, according to Media Matters, some of the potentially unconsidered legal implications of the bill. For example, as Hales explained, while the bill states a born-alive infant is a legal person for all purposes, that definition appeared to be in conflict with Hales' understanding that an infant younger than 30 days cannot be added to a will in North Carolina. DeSanctis said, here's a NARAL board member opposing a born-alive bill in North Carolina and claiming that an infant can't be a legal person because you can't add them to a will until they're 30 days old. That is true. That is true. Okay, DeSanctis' characterization is accurate, and Media Matters is now saying that that is incitement of violence. This is the big lie of the week, and it's going to be the big lie going forward. And the big lie on a daily basis from the left is that if you criticize the left, you are now involved in incitement against the left. That's a horrible lie. I mean, they've been using it for the last couple of weeks about Ilhan Omar, that if you criticize Ilhan Omar for being a rabid anti-Semite, somehow you're inciting violence against her. When Bernie Sanders says that millions will die because Medicare for all has not been passed, that's not an incitement of violence. When Democrats suggest that President Trump is a Russian agent, that is not incitement of violence. When Democrats call me alt-right or suggest that I am responsible for violent attacks for which I have no responsibility, that is not incitement of violence. But it's incitement of violence for us to point out when the left is wrong. I mean, that Media Matters tweet is so telling. The one where they suggest that me defending myself against a slander is now incitement of violence against the person who attacked me in the first place. It's just amazing. And you can see how cynical this tactic is. All of small r republicanism is reliant on us being able to have discussions with each other and, yes, criticize each other. And if bad faith criticisms take place, the proper answer to that is to point out that a bad faith criticism has taken place. It is not to suggest that the person who made the bad faith criticism is somehow involved in incitement to violence. If we reach the point where every critique is now considered incitement, free speech no longer exists. Remember, incitement is not covered by the First Amendment. So if the left moves to this standard where everything that they don't like is now incitement to some form of violence and therefore can be regulated, you end up with the repressive tolerance regime first proposed by Herbert Marcuse, the 1960s era make love not war Frankfurt School professor, who suggested that true tolerance lay in silencing voices from the right. Because if we allowed those voices to speak, then somehow even the expression of those viewpoints would amount to a targeting of people on the left. And this mentality, unfortunately, which started on a lot of college campuses, has expanded outward. It's expanded outward to the point of the absurd, to the point where even the expression of certain views is considered a form of supremacy that must be shut down. The best example of that today is there's an article from a woman named Sophia Lung in Library Journal in which she suggests that libraries are now repositories of white supremacy. Why? Because there are a lot of books by white people at libraries. In a piece that was put up yesterday, she said, "Whiteness as collections." I had this interesting mini eureka moment a few weeks ago I wanted to share for a few reasons. One, I don't usually reflect on the connections that help me understand how I learned something new or what goes into coming up with some new concept. Most of the time, the connections aren't clear to me. Two, I like to show students that inspiration for new research or scholarly ideas doesn't have to come only from scholarly publications. Three, I needed to write it out to fully understand how I came to this conclusion and to really understand what this conclusion means. Marie Kondo has been in the zeitgeist for a while, but especially now that she has a Netflix series. I saw the first episode a while back and it reminded me of how having a space clean of clutter and mess really helps the mind feel clearer. Marie Kondo's spiritual approach to objects also made me reflect upon our relationship with objects and why we feel so much attachment to intimate objects, to inanimate things. Why can't we just let those things go? And she goes on to suggest that libraries themselves are a formation of whiteness. She says, in 2017, for a White AF conference, White as Bleep conference, I shared an Airbnb with Vani Natarajan, an amazing librarian of color whose thinking continues to push me and who I respect and admire so much. And we had some really interesting discussions where I learned a lot. One of the mind-blowing things she shared was this idea of how our library collections, because they're mostly written by straight white men, are a physical manifestation of white men ideas taking up all the space in our library stacks. Pause here and think about this. So in other words, if there are a lot of books by white people, those are white ideas. They're taking up too much space in the library. That's white supremacy too. So the left is now going to label everything white supremacy, and white supremacy, of course, is a form of incitement. And so burning books, hey, what the hell? Throw the books out of the library, and why not burn them? I mean, come on. What are they going to do? You don't want them getting into the wrong hands. We'll get to more of this stupidity in just 1 second. First, there's a saying most athletes abide by. Play like you're in first. Train like you're in second. There's a new podcast from Wondery. It's called Sports Wars. You're going to hear what happens when some of the most elite athletes on the planet take that phrase to heart and battle their biggest rivals for the chance to go down in history as one of the greats. Here are some of the matchups. Veteran Brett Favre being challenged for his spot by rookie Aaron Rodgers. Isaiah Thomas's beef with Michael Jordan after missing out on the Dream Team. Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer's battle for the title of greatest tennis player of all time. I'm a huge sports fan. I recommend sports books on the show all the time. I am a subscriber to virtually all of the sports services, so I cannot wait to listen to the rest of this podcast. I've already heard some of it. It's really great. It sounds pretty awesome. Subscribe to Sports Wars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you are listening right now. Again, that is Sports Wars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. Okay, so back to this stupid idea that libraries are a repository of white ideas. If you don't already know, says this writer, Sophia Lung, writing for Library Journal. She says, if you don't already know, whiteness as property is a seminal critical race theory concept, first introduced by Cheryl Harris in her 1993 Harvard Law Review article by the same name. She writes, slavery as a system of property facilitated the merger of white identity and property, and the formation of whiteness as property required the erasure of native peoples. Basically, white people want to stay being white because of the privilege and protection whiteness affords under the law they created. So I guess the theory of the article, according to at least Sophia Lung, is that property itself is a white people creation, which is ridiculous. I mean, truly ridiculous. It is a deep part of Judeo-Christian history at the very least. Harris makes this really good point. Whiteness and property share a common premise, a conceptual nucleus of a right to exclude. Bam! That really hits it on the head. If you look at any U.S. library collection, especially those in higher education institutions, most of the collections, books, journals, archival papers, other media, etc., are written by white dudes, writing about white ideas, white things or ideas, people, and things they stole from people of color and then claimed as white property with all of the rights to use and enjoyment that Harris describes in her article. When most of our collections filled with this so-called knowledge, it continues to validate only white voices and perspectives and erases the voices of people of color. Collections are representation of what librarians or faculty deem to be authoritative knowledge, and as we know, this field and educational institutions historically and currently have been the sites of whiteness. Library collections continue to promote and proliferate whiteness with their very existence and the fact that they are physically taking up space in our libraries. No more collections. Stop that. Stop library collections. Burn the books. They are paid for using money that was usually ill-gotten and at the cost of black and brown lives via the prison industrial complex, the spoils of war, etc. Yeah, I'm sure that's what happened. I'm sure that Widner Library at Harvard is built solely on white people stealing black people's money. That's for sure what happened there. And I'm sure that all the collections at Widner Library at Harvard University, one of the largest libraries on planet Earth, I'm sure that it's all about preserving whiteness, not about, having lots of books that we can all peruse. Libraries filled with mostly white collections indicate that we don't care about what people of color think. We don't care to hear from people of color themselves. We don't consider people of color to be scholars. We don't think people of color are as valuable, knowledgeable, or as important as white people. To return to the Harris quote from above, library collections and spaces have historically kept out black, indigenous, people of color as they were meant to do and continue to do. One only has to look at the most recent incident at the library of my alma mater, Barnard College, where several security guards tried to kick out a black Columbia student for being black. That is not accurate. What happened at Barnard, we talked about it on the radio show. What happened at Barnard is that a black student went for free food at a library, refused to show ID to police over and over and over again. One of the officers was black. And then, after the police said, okay, we're going to take you outside, then he told everybody to turn on their cameras and urged people to distribute all of this information. I mean, this is insanity, but this is, unfortunately, the growing wave of the radical left. It's not everybody on the left, but it is a growing wave within the radical left. All speech we don't like is violence. White supremacy is violence. Listen, I hate white supremacy. I think it's evil. But white supremacy is not violence, and simply existing is not white supremacy. So here is the chain of thought. all conservatives are Nazis. Nazis deserve to be punched. Punch the Nazi. Right? All conservatives are far right. All conservatives are far righters incite people. Therefore, regulate them. All white people are conservative. All conservatives are racist. All racism leads to violence. Therefore, get rid of the white people collections at the libraries. And this chain of thought is so perverse and so stupid and so non-unifying, it's nearly astonishing. Unfortunately, as I say, it is becoming more and more prominent. In fact, there is a piece from Rolling Stone today talking about Notre Dame, in which Rolling Stone suggests that burning down Notre Dame was good for Notre Dame. They tweeted out, quote, "The building was so overburdened with meaning that its burning feels like an act of liberation." That's according to Rolling Stone magazine. Why? Because the history of Judeo-Christian values, the history of the West, is in fact burdensome and bad, and thus must be torn out at its roots. So if Notre Dame burns, that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. So here is what this article from Notre Dame, from Rolling Stone suggests by E.J. Dixon. Okay, the article suggests, for some people in France, Notre Dame has also served as a deep-seated symbol of resentment, a monument to a deeply flawed institution, and an idealized Christian European France that arguably never existed in the first place. You see, when symbols burn, that's good because we have placed meaning in those symbols. The building was so overburdened with meaning that its burning feels like an act of liberation, says Patricio Del Real, an architectural historian at Harvard University. If nothing else, the cathedral has been viewed by some as a stodgy reminder of the old city, the embodiment of the Paris of stone and faith, just as the Eiffel Tower exemplifies the Paris of modernity, joie de vivre, and change, Michael Kimmelman wrote for the New York Times. Despite politicians on both sides of the French political spectrum discouraging people from trying to politicize the Notre Dame fire, it would be a mistake to view the building as little more than a Paris tourist attraction, says John Harwood, an architectural historian and associate professor at the University of Toronto. It's literally a political monument. All cathedrals are, he says. For centuries, the cathedral was the seat of the bishop of the Catholic Church at a time when there was virtually no distinction between church and state. Notre Dame acquired even more overtly nationalist symbolism following its renovation in the 19th century by Eugene Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc, who is widely considered the godfather of modern historical architecture restoration. His restoration of the church was highly controversial to an extent it still is today. His approach to restoration was not let's fix the building as it is and put it in decent structural condition, says Cesare Berignani, assistant professor at the Spitzer School of Architecture, City College of New York. In fact, he acted in a much more inventive and problematic way because he claimed to reestablish or restore to the church an image that it may never have had. It was his own reinvention or his own idea of how the church may have existed at the beginning of the 13th century. The restoration led to a reappraisal of the Gothic style as a kind of ultimate symbol of French architecture. What it means to be French, however, has obviously changed a great deal over the past few centuries. While France is still predominantly Christian, the number of practicing Catholics has fallen year after year, from 64% in 2010 to 56% in 2012, according to one census figure. The number of Muslims in France is also growing, comprising more than 5% of the population, giving rise to rampant Islamophobia. A profound income gap has led to the explosion of protests from the Yellow Vests. Therefore, Notre Dame has lost some of its weight as a totem of national identity. It is so therefore it burning, not a terrible thing, not a terrible thing. Instead, we should, reflect on what France means now and then rebuild this monument, not in its original style, but in line with what France means now. So this is the push from the left. And unfortunately, as I say, it is becoming more and more prominent. There's an article in the Washington Post today suggesting that the Judeo-Christian tradition, even the invocation of that very good, true, and historically accurate phrase is a very bad thing. I'll explain in just 1 second. First, you're going to have to go over to dailywire.com and subscribe. When you do, you get the rest of this show live. And that's pretty awesome because you also get 2 additional hours of the show every afternoon. Also, you get to be part of our mailbag. Also, you get our Sunday special on Saturdays. Also, you get special access to the backstages. Also, Andrew Klavan has a conversation coming up. He has another book coming out called Another Kingdom. It's out now. It has received rave reviews. If you haven't picked up a copy yet, you can head on over to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, grab one while your supplies last. Today only, you can catch Drew doing a live book signing of Another Kingdom on today's episode of The Conversation at 7 p.m. Eastern. To get a signed copy and a chance to have your question answered, head on over to premiercollectibles.com/anotherkingdom. That's premiercollectibles.com/anotherkingdom. Tune in. It should be a lot of fun. Sorry, that is actually tomorrow. Not today. It's tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. So go check that out tomorrow and subscribe so that you can have access to having your questions answered, and all the rest of that sort of thing. We have all sorts of goodies. When you get the annual subscription, you also get this, the very greatest in beverage vessels, leftist tears, hot or cold tumbler, magnificent. It is just great, and you will enjoy every second of it. Also, check us out on YouTube and iTunes. Please leave a review. It always helps us. We are the largest, fastest-growing conservative podcast and radio show in the nation.